The crowd was unusually quiet, yet the tension in the air was almost suffocating. A long line of customers snaked through the opulent lobby of the luxury building, their eyes shifting uneasily as they sensed the brewing storm. And at the center of it all was her, Alicia Thompson, barely 23, standing frozen at the entrance, her heart hammering against her ribs as if trying to escape. The security guard, a towering man in a perfectly pressed uniform, had stepped in front of her like a wall. "You cannot come in here," he said, his voice sharp, laced with a kind of cruel satisfaction that made her stomach twist. He didn't even glance at her credentials, because in his mind they didn't matter. To him, she was just another face he could judge and dismiss without consequence. I have an appointment," Alicia said softly, her voice trembling but polite. "I'm here to see Mr. Caldwell about my application." The guard's lips curled into a derisive smirk. "You, here. Do you even know how people like you behave in a place like this?" His tone was loud, degrading, meant to humiliate, and it worked. A few people in the crowd laughed under their breath, others pulled out their phones, filming. Alicia's face flushed with a combination of anger and shame. She wanted to scream, to fight, but the weight of the uniform, the authority, and the silent crowd pinned her in place. "You're not allowed inside without proper authorization," he continued, his voice echoing through the marble hall. "And frankly, I don't think anyone would trust someone like you here, not in a million years." The words stung. They weren't just about rules, they were about her skin, her appearance, the assumptions he made before even glancing at her badge. The crowd murmured, some whispering, some glaring, but no one stepped forward. Everyone had a reason to stay silent, or at least that's what they told themselves. Alicia swallowed, blinking back tears, her hands clutching a small envelope she had prepared with trembling fingers. Her entire life felt compressed into this single, unbearable moment. Years of struggle, of being underestimated, boiled down to a few cruel sentences. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a badge. Not just any badge, a professional official badge that carried her name, her credentials, the proof of her hard work, her integrity. She raised it slowly, deliberately. The guard's eyes narrowed, suspicion mingling with contempt. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. "It means I'm allowed here," Alicia said, her voice stronger now, steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I have every right to be here, check it if you want, but don't judge me by the color of my skin or what you think I'm worth." The guard's smirk faltered. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, but the moment was brief. Before he could react, a stranger in the crowd shifted closer, their presence almost imperceptible, but their gaze sharp, knowing. This person's eyes lingered on Alicia with recognition, an understanding that seemed to hold secrets too powerful to ignore. They were watching, waiting for the perfect moment. Alicia's breath caught. Something was about to change, though she didn't know what. The weight of every humiliating glance and every whispered judgment pressed against her chest. The room felt heavy with expectation. People were watching, phones raised, capturing her humiliation for an audience she would never know. She could feel the world closing in, ready to write her story as a failure. And then a thought flickered in her mind. "No, I won't let them define me. Not today, not ever." The guard stepped closer, his tone now a mix of irritation and veiled menace. "Show me that badge, or you'll have to leave." Alicia lifted her badge higher, the little metal rectangle glinting under the fluorescent lights. And just as the guard's hand shot out to grab it, or maybe to push her out, the stranger in the crowd took a half step forward, their expression unreadable but commanding. The murmur of the crowd grew, curiosity rippling like electricity. Something about that person made the air shift. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the moment stretched, hanging in suspense. Everyone could feel it, the calm before a storm, the tension before the revelation. "Question of the day," a narrator's voice, soft yet urgent, could have whispered to the viewer as if breaking the fourth wall. "How often do we judge someone before knowing their truth? When have you been wrongly judged or witnessed unfair treatment in public? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to let us know where you're watching from." Alicia's heart pounded like a drum. The guard's arrogance seemed endless, yet there was something coming, something that would flip the entire scene upside down. And in that suspended moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Let's go back to how this story truly began this morning. The morning sunlight filtered through the cracked blinds of a tiny apartment, painting the worn wooden floor with streaks of gold. The air smelled faintly of detergent and the lingering aroma of last night's cooking. Alicia Thompson stirred awake, her body aching from sleep that had never been entirely restful. She rubbed her eyes and sat up slowly, taking in the modest room she called home. It wasn't much. A single bedroom, a kitchenette so small the stove barely fit, and a bathroom whose tiles bore the memories of years. But it was hers and hers to share with the people she loved most in the world. Alicia was 23, with skin the deep hue of rich earth, eyes wide and expressive, carrying both warmth and quiet determination. Her hair, always neatly tied back in braids, framed a face that seemed to hold a constant tension between vulnerability and resilience. She had learned early that the world often judged her before it listened, and that truth had shaped her into someone careful, thoughtful, yet fiercely courageous. She moved quietly so as not to wake her younger brother, Jamal, who was curled up on the floor mattress, the faint hum of a fan cutting through the summer heat. At 19, he was bright and protective, always watching out for Alicia, even when she insisted she could handle life on her own. Their mother had passed 2 years ago, and their father had never been around. Alicia had become not just a sister, but a guardian, a provider, and a constant source of light in a household that could have easily been swallowed by hardship. In the kitchenette, she filled a small pot with water and placed it on the stove. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan and stirred, careful to make the small breakfast last for both herself and Jamal. Each movement was deliberate, infused with love and quiet devotion. She hummed softly, a song her mother used to sing, letting it calm her nerves for the day ahead. Her neighborhood, visible through the grimy window, was alive with its usual chaos. Children ran barefoot across cracked sidewalks, shouting and laughing. Neighbors bickered over fences or shared news about who had found work and who hadn't. The buildings were old, paint peeling, but it was a community where everyone knew each other's struggles and small victories. Alicia walked outside for a moment, stepping onto the cracked pavement and let the sun warm her face. She breathed in deeply. This was the life she had been given, and she had vowed to make the best of it, not just for herself, but for the family who depended on her. Despite her circumstances, Alicia carried herself with dignity. She had a way of smiling that could calm a storm, of listening so intently that anyone who spoke to her felt heard, even if they had nowhere else to turn. She had dreams, simple yet monumental in her heart. She dreamed of stability, of being able to care for her brother without fear, of one day owning a small house where laughter replaced worry. She wanted to study to climb out of the trap of generational poverty and to show that someone like her, someone the world often overlooked, could rise above expectation. By the time she finished breakfast, Alicia's tiny apartment was filled with the quiet rhythm of life. Jamal sat at the table, sipping water, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "You're leaving early today?" he asked, his voice groggy. "I have to," Alicia replied softly, brushing a loose braid from her face. "It's important. I'll be back soon." "Just hold the fort, okay?" Jamal nodded, though worry lingered in the corners of his eyes. He knew that every day Alicia ventured out into the wider world carried its own battles. She always returned bruised, not physically, but emotionally, from the quiet injustices that came with being young, black, and determined in a world that wasn't built to support people like her. Alicia prepared her small bag, a few personal items, the envelope containing documents she hoped would change everything, and hidden deep in a pocket, a badge that represented months of effort, late nights, and perseverance. She glanced at it with a mix of pride and anxiety. That little rectangle of metal held her dreams, her hard work, and her dignity, all of it condensed into something tangible, yet fragile, like a candle fighting against the wind. As she walked through the streets of her neighborhood, the contrast between her world and the one she was about to enter felt impossible. Children played freely in the dirt, vendors shouted over the noise of passing cars, and the sun bore down on the uneven pavement. She adjusted her worn shoes, straightened her simple blouse, and drew in a steadying breath. Every step carried her closer to the confrontation waiting for her, yet also closer to the chance to assert her worth, to prove that she was more than the assumptions people made about her. Alicia paused outside a small corner store, greeting Mr. Lewis, the elderly man who had watched her grow up. "Morning, Miss Alicia," he said with a smile. "Morning, Mr. Lewis," she replied, smiling despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "How's the shop today?" "Same as always, but you." "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Maybe just a little, but I've got to try, right?" He nodded knowingly, handing her a small chocolate bar. "For luck," he said, "and for courage, you're stronger than they know." Alicia took it, tucking it into her bag with a grateful nod. She continued walking, each step heavier than the last, not from the weight of her bag, but from the anticipation of the day ahead. Her heart ached for the people she loved, for the family she carried on her back, and for the countless others who struggled silently every day. And yet, in that quiet morning moment before the confrontation, there was a spark in her eyes that no hardship could extinguish. Alicia Thompson was not defined by the walls of her apartment, the cracked streets of her neighborhood, or the judgments of strangers. She was defined by her courage, her compassion, and her unshakable belief that she deserved respect, dignity, and the chance to rise. Little did she know the day ahead would test every ounce of her resilience and would change her life in ways she could never imagine. Alicia walked briskly through the streets, clutching her bag tightly, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. The day, which had begun with quiet hope, now pressed down on her like a weight she could not shrug off. She thought of her younger brother, Jamal, who had barely slept last night, coughing from the lingering effects of a persistent cold. And most of all, she thought of her grandmother, Mrs. Thompson, who lived with them and whose health had been deteriorating steadily. The problem was urgent, unavoidable, and terrifying. Mrs. Thompson's medication, critical, life-saving medication, had run out. The pharmacy had refused to hold it without payment. Alicia had called every possible friend, relative, and social program, hoping for assistance, only to be met with polite refusals or dead ends. Every avenue had been exhausted. Every door had closed. The envelope in her bag wasn't just papers, it was her last hope. Inside were documents that could grant her assistance, a chance to secure the resources her family desperately needed. But even as she clutched it, panic surged through her. How would she convince anyone to help someone like her? A young black woman from a struggling neighborhood trying to navigate a world designed to overlook people like her? Her breaths grew shallow as she navigated the uneven sidewalks, dodging potholes and piles of discarded trash. Each step toward the building where she hoped help awaited felt heavier, as if the city itself were resisting her. The clock ticked relentlessly, reminding her that with each passing minute, Mrs. Thompson's condition worsened. Time was no longer an abstract concept. It was a cruel adversary. Alicia's thoughts raced, a mixture of fear, frustration, and self-reassurance. I can do this. I have to. There's no other choice. She bit her lip to stifle a rising sob, the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The harsh reality was this. If she failed, if she left empty-handed, her grandmother could face serious complications. And for Jamal, who relied on her so completely, failure was not an option. She paused on a street corner, leaning against a lamppost, and allowed herself a brief moment of despair. Tears threatened to spill, but she wiped them quickly. She didn't have the luxury of crying. She didn't have the luxury of letting despair take her down before the battle even began. The people she loved needed her courage now, not her sorrow. As she walked again, her mind kept returning to the pharmacy's refusal, the cold faces of those who turned her away, the whispering neighbors who implied she didn't belong anywhere. The humiliation gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. What mattered now was survival, her grandmother's life, her brother's future, the fragile thread that held their little family together. The streets changed as she approached the luxury building, the contrast stark and almost surreal. The neighborhood's worn buildings gave way to polished marble facades and tinted glass doors. The air smelled of antiseptic and high-end perfumes, a world away from the dusty, familiar streets she had grown up in. Each step made her stomach tighten. She knew she looked out of place. Her modest blouse and worn shoes screamed of her life's hardships. Here, appearances mattered, and hers told a story of struggle she had no desire to justify, no time to explain. Her hand hovered over the envelope in her bag as she neared the entrance. This was it, the point of no return. The building itself felt imposing, almost alive, as if it were aware of the judgmental gazes she would soon face. She could already hear the murmur of well-dressed people behind tinted doors, the faint click of heels on marble floors, the subtle hum of a world she had never truly entered. Alicia's heart raced. I don't belong here, but I have to try. The thought repeated itself, a mantra she clung to as fear clawed at her resolve. She remembered her mother's words, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Alicia. It's stepping forward even when the fear threatens to paralyze you." Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the familiar streets and the worn comfort of her apartment. But she couldn't. Not when her grandmother's life was on the line, not when Jamal's hope rested on her shoulders. Not when this was the last chance she had to secure the help they so desperately needed. She could feel the weight of every potential humiliation pressing down. The sneering guards, the dismissive clerks, the whispers of people judging her before she even spoke. And yet intertwined with that fear was a flicker of hope, a fragile, stubborn ember that refused to die. Maybe this time someone will see me. Maybe this time someone will listen. As she reached the massive glass doors of the building, she paused. The reflection staring back at her showed a young woman exhausted, anxious, and terrified, but also determined. She drew in a long, shaky breath, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. She whispered to herself, barely audibly, for Grandma, for Jamal, for me. With that, Alicia squared her shoulders and stepped forward, placing her hand on the cold, polished door handle. Beyond it awaited judgment, humiliation, and the cruel gaze of those who saw her as less than. But beyond it also awaited possibility, a chance to prove her worth, to secure the life-saving help her family needed, and perhaps to confront the injustice that had followed her for so long. This was the point where desperation met courage. Every step forward carried the weight of her family's survival. Every heartbeat screamed urgency. And in that moment, Alicia understood something vital. Sometimes the greatest risks are the ones we must take when the world refuses to bend for us. She inhaled one last deep breath and stepped inside. The lobby gleamed under bright lights, a cavern of wealth and power that threatened to swallow her whole. Her stomach churned, her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. The confrontation was inevitable. She could see the guard waiting, the crowd forming silently behind him, and the subtle, judgmental glances already aimed at her. And in that single heartbeat before the collision, Alicia braced herself, knowing that the path forward would demand every ounce of courage she possessed. The glass doors swung open with a soft whoosh, and Alicia stepped inside, immediately swallowed by the scent of polished marble, leather chairs, and faint perfume, a world apart from the dusty streets she had left behind. The lobby was vast, echoing, and impossibly silent, except for the quiet tap of heels on the polished floors and the muted murmur of a receptionist typing behind a pristine counter. She felt small, invisible, out of place. Her pulse quickened as her eyes flicked across the space. Everything screamed affluence. The sparkling chandeliers, the marble floors that reflected light like water, the gold-trimmed elevators rising silently to the upper floors. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her even before anyone had spoken. Every step she took seemed louder than it should have been, echoing in the silent grandeur, and every glance in her direction felt like a spotlight on her inadequacy. She hugged her bag closer, her fingers brushing the edges of the envelope and the badge tucked inside. The little metal rectangle was heavy in her hand, not with its own weight, but with what it represented: hope, dignity, the culmination of months of effort, and a lifeline for her family. Alicia's mind raced as she approached the front desk. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, glanced up at her and gave a polite nod. Alicia swallowed hard. "I'm here for Mr. Caldwell. I have an appointment, please." She forced the words through her fear, her voice quiet but steady, almost afraid they might shatter if she let them tremble too much. The receptionist's eyes flicked over her for a moment, her simple blouse, worn shoes, the subtle signs of her life outside this world. Then, almost imperceptibly, her smile tightened and she typed something into the computer. Out of place, Alicia thought, but I can't let them see me falter. As she walked further, the lobby seemed to stretch endlessly. The polished floor reflected her image back at her, a young black woman with determination etched into every line of her face, yet trembling under the weight of the unknown. She felt the eyes of strangers on her, some curious, some amused, some silently judgmental. She could feel the whisper of assumptions brushing against her, the invisible labels people had already assigned to her before she had a chance to speak. Fear threatened to paralyze her, curling in her stomach like a cold coil. She had faced judgment before in smaller doses, in school, on the street, in workplaces where respect was optional. But here, in this cavernous hall of wealth and power, the stakes were higher. Every misstep, every nervous glance could turn this attempt at survival into public humiliation. And yet, woven tightly with that fear was a spark, a fragile, stubborn ember of hope. "I have to do this. I must," she reminded herself. "For Grandma, for Jamal, for me." She kept her head down slightly, not out of shame, but as a shield. The closer she got to the elevators and the ornate security desk, the more pronounced the contrast became. Here, she was not just poor or underdressed. She was a stranger, someone whose very existence challenged the pristine world around her. And yet, with every step, the ember of hope refused to die. Maybe, just maybe, someone here would recognize the truth in her, the determination that couldn't be bought, the integrity that had kept her family alive through countless struggles. Alicia paused for a moment near the security checkpoint, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. She glanced down at the envelope, then at the badge tucked inside. Her hands shook slightly, not from weakness but from anticipation. This moment carried the weight of her family's survival. One misstep, one judgmental glance, and it could all be over before it even began. As she took another breath, she noticed the reflections in the polished marble behind the security desk. The guard was already there, leaning casually against the counter, his posture radiating authority and arrogance. He hadn't looked up yet, but Alicia felt the weight of his gaze as if he had. She froze for a heartbeat, the fear clawing at her chest. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to turn back to the familiar streets and worn comfort of home. But she couldn't, not now, not when her grandmother's life depended on her courage. "I belong here as much as anyone," she whispered to herself almost silently. The words felt strange on her lips, but the act of saying them grounded her. She squared her shoulders, straightened her back, and took a step forward. The crowd in the lobby had begun to notice her. People paused mid-conversation or mid-gesture, their phones momentarily lowered. Some whispered to one another, casting sideways glances. She could feel the judgment in the air, but she refused to let it consume her. Each step forward was a statement. "I am here. I deserve to be here. I will not be silenced or dismissed." She approached the guard now, the man who had already been made aware of her presence, a subtle tension hanging in the space between them. Her hands instinctively reached for the badge in her bag, the weight of it reminding her of the stakes, the urgency, and the dignity she refused to relinquish. And then, with a deep, calming breath, she stepped fully into the threshold, ready to face whatever awaited her. The crowd's murmur grew slightly, anticipation curling in the air. The confrontation was imminent, and for Alicia, there was no turning back. Every step had been a battle against fear, against self-doubt, against the invisible walls the world had built around people like her. But now, as her hand brushed against the envelope and the badge inside, she felt a quiet certainty. Hope and courage were her allies, and she would carry them straight into the storm. It was here at this threshold, standing between fear and the unknown, that Alicia took her final breath of preparation. The world beyond the doors awaited, judgment and humiliation already lined up to greet her. And yet within her chest, a flame flickered, stubborn and unyielding, refusing to be snuffed out. "This is it," she thought. "No turning back. Whatever happens next, I will face it." And with that, Alicia stepped fully into the lobby, ready to confront the cruelty, the prejudice, and the silent judgment of a world that had never made space for someone like her. The moment Alicia crossed the polished threshold, the guard's gaze snapped to her like a predator spotting its prey. He straightened instantly, chest puffed, arms crossed, exuding the kind of authority that relied not on fairness but on fear and prejudice. "Hold it right there," he barked, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the few patrons scattered through the lobby. "And just what do you think you're doing here?" Alicia froze, her heart hammering. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but now, faced with the man's cold stare and the heavy weight of the crowd, everything she had prepared seemed fragile. I have an appointment," she stammered, her voice wavering but polite. "Mr. Caldwell, he's expecting me. I need to submit these documents." The guard's laugh was low, cruel, and deliberate. "Appointments," he scoffed. "Do you even know how people like you behave in a place like this? This is not your world, young lady. You don't just waltz in here thinking you belong." Alicia's chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to protect herself from the humiliation that was building around her like a storm. Yet deep inside, she felt that spark, the stubborn ember of hope, that refused to let her crumble under the weight of his prejudice. "Please," she said softly, "I'm just here to submit my documents. I haven't done anything wrong." The guard's eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Wrong. You're here, aren't you? That's enough. You're out of place, and frankly, people like you make me nervous. You should leave before someone decides to call the police." The words struck Alicia like a physical blow. "People like me?" she repeated, barely able to keep her voice steady. Her fingers trembled around the envelope in her bag. The sting of the public judgment, the sneers of those who had gathered, the subtle gasps of curiosity, pinned her in place. She could feel every gaze in the room like a needle on her skin, each one silently agreeing with him she did not belong. "Yeah," he spat, straightening again, almost theatrically. "I'm talking about you, and you can start by understanding that rules exist for a reason. You don't just walk into places like this without permission." And I happen to be the one making sure it doesn't happen. A small crowd had now gathered, some whispering behind their hands, some discreetly filming. The air was thick with tension. Alicia could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, feel the flush rising to her face. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and entirely alone, trapped by both the man's arrogance and the silent complicity of those around her. Tears threatened to spill, but she blinked them back. "Sir, she began, but the guard cut her off. "No, you don't get to explain," he said, his tone sharp, final. "We all know what someone like you is capable of, and frankly, I don't trust it, not one bit. You're wasting everyone's time, and I suggest you leave before this gets ugly." Alicia felt the weight of every word crush her. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, to assert the truth that she was not the stereotype he believed her to be. But the sheer authority of his presence, combined with the silent judgment of the onlookers, made her feel powerless. Each insult, each whispered assumption cut deeper than any physical blow could. Her fingers tightened on the badge in her bag. She wanted to show it, to prove that she had every right to be here, but fear made her hesitate. Fear of ridicule, fear of escalation, fear of being mocked even more publicly. Still, that ember of hope refused to die. She reminded herself, silently, I am here for a reason. I deserve this chance. I cannot leave empty-handed. The guard's voice rose again, echoing through the marble hall. "And don't think I won't call security if you don't move. This is not a charity. This is not a playground. You don't belong here, do you hear me?" The crowd murmured, some smirking, some exchanging sideways glances, others pretending to scroll on their phones to avoid involvement. The indifference of bystanders cut Alicia deeper than any insult. It was a silence that screamed louder than words, a confirmation that she was on her own, that no one would step in to defend her dignity. She swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes. She felt every ounce of fear and humiliation wash over her, threatening to pull her into defeat. And yet she stayed rooted, her fingers brushing the edge of the badge tucked safely in her bag. She had worked too hard for this moment, and her family's survival depended on her courage. She began again, her voice trembling but stronger this time. "I have my credentials. I have every right to be here." The guard's laugh was crueler now, louder, drawing the attention of more people in the lobby. "Credentials? You think a badge will change anything? People like you? No one trusts people like you. Now leave before I make you." Alicia felt the shame and fear of public humiliation threaten to crush her, but she took a steadying breath. The crowd was silent, watching, waiting, recording. Every instinct told her to retreat, to hide, but she could not. She could not abandon her family's hope. Every fiber of her being screamed, "You must stand. You must not let him define you." And at that precise moment, just as the tension seemed unbearable, just as the humiliation peaked, there was a shift in the crowd. Someone had noticed. A presence, calm yet commanding, edged closer, a subtle recognition in their eyes. They were watching Alicia, seeing something that no one else could, her truth, her courage, her right to stand there undiminished by prejudice. For Alicia, the confrontation had reached its peak. The guard had unleashed every ounce of cruelty, the crowd had remained silent, and the room seemed frozen, suspended in judgment. She felt cornered, exposed, and on the brink of despair. But even in that moment, that ember of hope flickered. Something, somewhere, was about to change everything. Alicia's hands trembled as she held the badge tighter, the polished metal cool against her palm. She tried to meet the guard's eyes to assert her presence, but his gaze was unyielding, predatory, dismissive. Each sneer, each sharp word, each subtle curl of his lip drove a knife deeper into her resolve. She could feel the weight of every judgment in the room, the silent stares, the whispers, the phones recording every moment of her shame. Her chest tightened and a sob threatened to escape, but she swallowed it back. Not here, not in front of all these people. But the tears came anyway, unbidden, pooling in the corners of her eyes. She blinked rapidly, hoping no one would notice, yet she could feel them. The curious glances, the sideways smirks, the faint chuckles of strangers who had decided she was entertainment rather than a human being. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I haven't done anything wrong." Guard leaned closer, his shadow looming over her. "Wrong? You're already in the wrong place," he sneered. "And you should be grateful I don't throw you out myself." The words stung, but it wasn't the guard's voice that cut deepest. It was the silence around her, the spectators who did nothing, who silently agreed with his cruelty, who filmed her misery instead of offering help. Their silence was louder than any insult, heavier than any hand pushing her down. It told her, "You are alone. You have no one. No one cares." Alicia pressed her hands to her face, hiding her tears for a moment, feeling the shame and exhaustion of countless days like this. The quiet judgments, the assumptions, the dismissals that followed her from street to street. job to job, life to life. She had endured so much already, yet this moment, in all its intensity and public exposure, felt like the culmination of every indignity she had ever faced. She could feel her strength wavering, slipping like sand through her fingers. Fear, humiliation, and hopelessness swirled together into a suffocating weight that pressed down on her chest. Her mind raced. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I never did. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just nothing. The crowd's murmurs grew, whispers like blades slicing through her confidence. Some murmured disbelief, some amusement, and some pity, but none acted. None intervened. The oppressive silence of inaction mirrored her worst fears, that her voice, her presence, her existence could be ignored, dismissed, erased. I'm sorry, Alicia whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Not an apology for her actions. She had done nothing wrong, but an apology for existing in a world that refused to see her worth. The admission felt humiliating, but she could not find the strength to challenge the guard anymore. She was alone, completely alone. Her knees threatened to buckle, and she gripped the edge of the counter for support, feeling the polished marble cool against her palms. She considered leaving, turning back into the streets she knew, retreating to the small apartment where her family waited, where failure wouldn't be broadcast for the world to see. Every instinct urged her to escape the humiliation, to retreat to safety, to hide. But even in that despair, a quiet ember of determination persisted, flickering weakly but refusing to die. Alicia thought of her grandmother, frail and reliant on the medication she could not yet afford. She thought of Jamal, trusting her to hold the family together. And she thought of herself, not the girl everyone assumed she was, but the woman who had endured, struggled, and fought for every inch of dignity she possessed. The weight of hopelessness pressed down, yet she could not let it extinguish her. And just as she began to lower her gaze, ready to accept defeat, she noticed something in the crowd, a figure standing slightly apart from the others, observing her with quiet intensity. Unlike the rest, this person did not laugh, did not whisper, did not film. They watched with an understanding that went deeper than the surface judgments surrounding her. Alicia's breath hitched. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if someone, anyone, recognized her worth, saw her courage, and stepped forward to defend her. But she quickly shook the thought away. That was fantasy. She was alone here, always alone. The guard, sensing her weakening, leaned in even closer, his voice a low growl now, filled with the satisfaction of domination. You think your little badge changes anything? People like you don't belong, do you hear me? Not here, not anywhere near this place. Every syllable felt like a hammer pounding against the fragile shell of Alicia's hope. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in with the judgment of every bystander who had chosen inaction over justice. Her legs wobbled. Her tears spilled freely now, hot and salty, tracing paths down her cheeks she could not hide. And yet in that lowest, darkest moment, she felt something stir, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The presence in the crowd shifted slightly, a movement of attention that was calm, deliberate, and unmistakably powerful. It was as if the air itself acknowledged that the moment had reached a tipping point. Alicia inhaled shakily, her body trembling from the combination of fear, humiliation, and sheer exhaustion. She wanted to collapse. She wanted to leave. She wanted to disappear and escape the world that seemed so determined to crush her dignity. But deep down, a whisper persisted. This is not the end. This is not the last word. Her hands, still clutching the badge and envelope, felt heavier than ever, but also more important. They held the proof of her worth, her right to be here, her struggle for dignity. And though she could not see how, she felt in her bones that the tides were about to shift, that the unbearable, suffocating weight of judgment was about to meet something it had not anticipated. Alicia closed her eyes briefly, drawing in a shaky, determined breath. The tears continued to fall, the humiliation pressing down, but for the first time a quiet thought threaded through her despair. Someone is watching. Someone knows the truth. And soon everything will change. For now she remained rooted in her place, a solitary figure of vulnerability and courage, completely exposed to cruelty, yet carrying the faint, unyielding flame of hope that no judgment, no insult, no silence could snuff out. The marble lobby seemed to shrink around Alicia, every eye upon her, every whispered judgment a weight pressing against her chest. Her shoulders slumped, her hands still clinging to the badge and envelope, and the tears streaming down her cheeks felt like proof that the world had already condemned her. The guard's sneer had become almost theatrical, his voice slicing through the silent lobby with cruel satisfaction. "You're wasting everyone's time," he spat. "Go home where you belong." And then, unexpectedly, the room shifted. A single calm presence emerged from the crowd, a figure whose very bearing commanded attention without effort. They moved with quiet confidence, their steps measured and deliberate, drawing closer to Alicia and the guard alike. There was no arrogance in their posture, no hostility in their gaze, only a steady, almost regal authority. The murmuring crowd instinctively parted, leaving a clear path for this person. Their eyes were soft but piercing, filled with compassion yet resolute in strength. Every whisper, every curious glance seemed to fade in their presence, as if the energy of injustice itself recognized the arrival of someone who would confront it. "Excuse me," the figure said, their voice calm, low, and unwavering, carrying easily through the lobby without raising its volume. "Is there a problem here?" The guard turned sharply, his irritation immediately visible. "Yes, there's a problem," he snapped, his voice louder now, defensive. "This woman, she's—" "Step aside," the stranger interrupted, their eyes fixed on him, a quiet power in the words that demanded obedience without threat. "Let me handle this." The guard blinked, thrown by the unexpected authority in the stranger's tone. He straightened, puffed his chest again, but there was a subtle shift in the energy of the room, subtle but undeniable. For the first time, the arrogant certainty in his posture wavered. Alicia blinked through her tears, barely able to comprehend what she was seeing. The presence of this person felt like a lifeline, a sudden, unexpected force standing between her and the humiliation she had been forced to endure. Hope stirred in her chest, fragile but insistent. She wasn't alone anymore. The stranger's eyes met hers, warm and kind. "You're okay," they said softly, almost as if reading her mind. "I see you, you're safe here." Alicia felt her throat tighten. The words, simple as they were, held the weight of an unspoken promise. That someone in this world recognized her humanity, that someone was willing to intervene to stop the tide of cruelty that had threatened to drown her. The guard, however, was not so easily disarmed. "Who are you two?" he began, indignation lacing his voice. "This doesn't concern you. Step back." The stranger's gaze did not waver. They remained calm, unshaken, yet every word they spoke carried authority that the guard could not ignore. "I'm here to ensure fairness," they said gently but firmly. "And right now I see someone being treated unjustly." The tension in the lobby shifted palpably. Bystanders leaned forward slightly, some whispering amongst themselves, sensing the change. The guard's scowl deepened, irritation and uncertainty warring across his face. He had power in this space, yes, but the stranger exuded a different kind of power, one rooted not in intimidation, but in truth, dignity, and unwavering confidence. Alicia's chest heaved with relief, though her tears continued to fall. The embodiment of calm authority was now standing between her and the public humiliation she had endured for what felt like hours. And even though she couldn't see how this would end, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in days, hope, real and tangible, warming her from within. "Step aside," the stranger repeated, their voice now a little sharper, not with anger but with undeniable command. "She is here on official business. You will not judge her, you will not intimidate her, and you will allow her to proceed." The guard bristled, clearly struggling to reconcile his assumed authority with the undeniable presence of someone who refused to bow to fear. He took a small step back, muttering under his breath, but his eyes remained locked on Alicia, filled with disbelief that someone had dared to challenge him. Alicia looked at the stranger again, her hands trembling not from fear this time, but from relief and disbelief. "Who? Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The stranger gave a small, reassuring smile. "Someone who believes in justice," they replied softly. "Right now, that's all that matters. Let's make sure no one here is treated unfairly." The lobby fell almost completely silent, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of bystanders shuffling to see what would happen next. The guard's smirk had faltered entirely, replaced by a tension he could not easily mask. Every ounce of his arrogance seemed to be meeting an immovable force of calm authority. Alicia's hands, still clutching the badge and envelope, felt lighter somehow. The moment of despair, the humiliation, the isolation, all of it had been interrupted by this presence. And although she did not yet know the stranger's full significance, the shift was unmistakable. For the first time that day, she felt that the battle might be won, that the injustice she faced could actually be corrected. And as the stranger stepped fully between her and the guard, exuding calm yet undeniable authority, the tension in the room shifted once again. The crowd leaned in, sensing that a revelation, something monumental, was about to occur. A storm had been halted, at least momentarily, by the presence of someone who refused to allow cruelty to go unchecked. Alicia inhaled deeply, her chest still tight, her tears still falling, but hope now burned steadily. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone was here, and they had the power to change everything. And in that quiet, powerful moment, before any words of full revelation had been spoken, the air itself seemed charged with anticipation, as if the lobby, the guard, and even the whispering crowd instinctively knew that the scales of justice were about to tip, and that what came next would be impossible to ignore. The lobby hung in a tense silence. The guard had taken a step back, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between Alicia and the calm stranger who now stood firmly in front of her. The once confident sneer had faltered, replaced by a mixture of confusion and unease. For the first time that day, someone else held the power in this room, and everyone could feel it. The stranger's gaze softened as they looked at Alicia, who still clutched the badge and envelope like a lifeline. "Alicia," they said gently, their voice carrying the weight of familiarity, "I need you to do one thing for me." Alicia blinked through her tears. "Yes, yes, sir," she whispered, voice trembling. "Show him this," the stranger instructed. With hands still slightly shaking, Alicia reached into her bag and pulled out the small, official badge she had been holding all day. The polished metal glinted under the lobby lights, catching the eyes of the guard and the crowd alike. Alicia held it up, her hands steadying as the room seemed to collectively lean in. The guard's eyes widened the instant they landed on the badge. His voice, which had been sharp, loud, and cruel moments before, faltered. What is this?" he stammered, disbelief overtaking his arrogance. The stranger's lips curved into a subtle, confident smile. "That," they said, nodding toward Alicia, "is someone who has every right to be here. That badge represents months of study, work, and dedication. She is not only authorized, she is qualified, respected, and entirely legitimate in this building." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were lowered, heads turned, and even the murmuring witnesses could no longer hide the shock on their faces. The reality of the situation began to sink in. The guard's assumptions, prejudice, and cruelty had been entirely unfounded. Every sneer, every insult, every attempt at humiliation now stood exposed as not just unprofessional, but deeply unjust. Alicia's breath hitched as the stranger stepped closer to the guard, now speaking directly to him with authority that brooked no contradiction. "Do you know who I am?" they asked, their tone calm but imbued with the weight of power. The guard blinked rapidly, his confidence visibly trembling. I don't," he began, but the stranger held up a hand, silencing him with effortless control. "I am the CEO of this company," the stranger declared, their voice clear and commanding, reverberating through the marble lobby. "Every protocol, every procedure, every building in this chain answers directly to me. And yet here you are, treating an innocent woman like a criminal, judging her for her appearance, assuming her worth based on prejudice. You do understand what you've done." The guard's face went pale. His arrogance had evaporated entirely, replaced by panic and disbelief. She, he started, but the words died in his throat. The stranger turned to the crowd now, their gaze sweeping over every witness, their voice calm but firm. "You all saw this. You saw judgment without cause, cruelty without reason, and silence in the face of injustice. Let this be a lesson. Appearances deceive, prejudice blinds, and assumptions destroy lives." Alicia's tears flowed freely now, but this time they were tears of relief and awe. She felt as if the weight of the world had lifted from her shoulders. The badge in her hand no longer felt fragile. It was a symbol of her rightful place, of validation she had fought so hard for, and of the power of truth to cut through cruelty. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word, realizing that they had witnessed not just a personal injustice, but a public one corrected in real time. The guard, once the embodiment of power and arrogance, now seemed small, insignificant, exposed. His confidence had collapsed, leaving him trembling under the weight of accountability. The stranger's gaze returned to Alicia, and this time there was something almost tender in their eyes. "You've been brave," they said softly. "More than you know. Today you didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for every person who has ever been judged unfairly, every life overlooked, every voice silenced by fear or prejudice. You are extraordinary." Alicia could barely speak, her throat tight with emotion. I didn't want my grandmother," she began, her voice breaking. "You did the right thing," the CEO interrupted gently. "And now justice will follow, not just for you, but for everyone who witnessed this injustice." The guard, finally finding his voice, stammered, I didn't know." The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with unwavering resolve. "Ignorance is no excuse. You made choices, and those choices have consequences." Today you humiliated an innocent woman publicly, and that cannot stand. You will face the full measure of accountability. The crowd murmured again, some whispering to one another in astonishment, others shaking their heads at the sheer magnitude of what they had witnessed. Phones that had been recording moments of shame now captured a different story, one of truth, justice, and moral courage prevailing against cruelty. Alicia's chest swelled with a mixture of relief, disbelief, and a slowly rising joy. The impossible had happened. The world that had seemed unyielding and cruel had shifted, and in the blink of an eye, she was no longer alone, no longer powerless, no longer the subject of humiliation. The CEO's final words to the guard cut through the lingering tension like a bell of justice. Your actions have consequences. You will be disciplined, and this behavior will never be tolerated in any of my establishments again. Let this be the last time someone assumes power over another through prejudice alone. The guard's shoulders slumped. His authority had evaporated entirely. The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension dissipating, replaced by awe at the revelation and respect for the bravery Alicia had shown. For Alicia, the badge in her hand now gleamed with significance beyond recognition. It represented her fight, her courage, and the undeniable truth that her dignity could never be stripped away by prejudice or cruelty. She looked up at the CEO, tears streaking her cheeks, and whispered, "Thank you, I don't even know what to say." The CEO's smile was calm, reassuring, and full of warmth. "No thanks needed. Today you showed the world what courage looks like, and now it's our responsibility to ensure that courage is met with justice and compassion." In that moment, the lobby, once a place of humiliation and fear, was transformed. Alicia stood upright, radiant, validated, and supported as the room finally recognized the truth. She belonged. And in that truth, a profound silence settled over the crowd, one that spoke louder than any words, echoing with the promise that justice, when wielded rightly, could change everything. The guard's face was pale, his arrogance completely stripped away. Every person in the lobby could see it, the collapse of a man who had wielded authority like a weapon, now reduced to trembling under the weight of accountability. The CEO's gaze remained unwavering, calm yet commanding, as they addressed him directly. "You have humiliated an innocent woman today, publicly and cruelly," the CEO stated, voice precise and firm. "Your actions are unacceptable. You will face immediate disciplinary measures, including suspension and mandatory sensitivity and professionalism training. And let me be clear, any future incident of discrimination, harassment, or abuse of power will result in permanent termination and legal consequences." The guard opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. His authority, once so absolute, had evaporated entirely. He had underestimated the power of truth, integrity, and justice, and now he was left to confront the full consequences of his behavior. The crowd, who had been silent in shock moments before, began to murmur again, this time with recognition of what had just occurred. Phones still recorded, but now the footage documented not humiliation, but the triumph of fairness over cruelty. Witnesses exchanged glances of awe, nodding silently to themselves. Some whispered apologies to Alicia, realizing how wrong they had been to watch silently, to judge without knowing. Alicia felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. She had survived the humiliation, yes, but more importantly, she had been recognized and supported in a way she had never imagined. The CEO stepped closer to her, placing a reassuring hand lightly on her shoulder. Their presence was solid, protective, and compassionate, and for the first time that day, Alicia felt completely safe. "You did everything right," the CEO said softly. "You showed courage when fear could have easily held you back. You stood up for yourself, for your family, and for every person who has been judged unfairly. That courage will never be wasted." Alicia's voice shook as she responded, tears streaming freely. I just wanted to help my grandmother. I never imagined. You've done more than you realize," the CEO interrupted gently. "And now it's our responsibility to ensure that your family's needs are met, not just today, but for the long term. No one should ever struggle alone, and no one should face humiliation for seeking help." At the CEO's signal, assistants moved quietly, bringing the documents Alicia had carried and guiding her to a private office. Within minutes, arrangements were being made to secure her grandmother's medication immediately. A financial assistance plan was set up to cover urgent medical expenses. Educational opportunities, housing support, and long-term stability were being arranged for Alicia and her family. Alicia could hardly process the magnitude of what was happening. It felt unreal, almost dreamlike, that someone had recognized her struggle and responded with such generosity and care. She sank into a chair in the office, overwhelmed by emotion, while the CEO reviewed the paperwork with calm efficiency. "Thank you," Alicia whispered again, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to even explain." "You don't need to explain anything," the CEO replied, smiling warmly. "You acted with integrity and bravery, that's enough. Today, justice has been served and compassion has won. That's all that matters." As the arrangements for her family's care were finalized, Alicia felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. Her grandmother would receive life-saving medication. Jamal would have security and stability. And for the first time, she could breathe without the suffocating weight of fear and humiliation pressing down on her chest. But it wasn't just practical help. It was the dignity she had regained. The acknowledgement of her courage, the validation of her worth, and the recognition that she deserved respect in every space she entered were far more powerful than any financial assistance. Alicia felt a profound shift inside her, a deep, enduring sense of self-worth and empowerment. The CEO looked at her, their eyes kind but resolute. "Remember this, Alicia. Life will often judge people based on appearances. It will make assumptions, it will be cruel, and it will try to break your spirit. But you've shown today that courage, honesty, and integrity will always shine brighter than prejudice. You have the power to rise above it, and to help others rise, too." Alicia nodded, tears flowing freely now, but her shoulders were straight, her posture confident. I understand. I promise I'll never forget this. I'll try to help others the way you helped me." The CEO smiled, a rare warmth in their expression. "That's all I ask. Use this opportunity not just to heal your own life, but to make a difference for others. The world needs more people like you, Alicia, brave, compassionate, and unyielding in the face of injustice." As the meeting concluded, Alicia left the office with a sense of transformation. The weight of despair, fear, and humiliation that had threatened to crush her had been lifted, replaced with relief, hope, and a profound understanding of her own strength. She walked through the lobby again, but this time, the stares and whispers no longer felt threatening. They felt irrelevant. She had been recognized for her courage, her humanity, and her worth, and nothing could take that away. Outside the building, the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the streets Alicia had walked that morning with fear and desperation. Now, each step felt lighter, freer, filled with purpose. Her family's future was no longer uncertain. Her grandmother's health would be cared for, Jamal's life secured, and Alicia herself empowered in ways she had never imagined. And as she walked away, she glanced back at the lobby, once a place of humiliation, now a place of justice, and realized that one moment of courage, supported by the right person at the right time, could truly change everything. In that day, Alicia learned a profound lesson. That justice, compassion, and dignity, when wielded with courage, could overturn even the deepest prejudices, transform lives, and create opportunities far beyond what one could imagine. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in the grand lobby. Alicia stood at the entrance of a sunlit community center, watching children laughing as they ran across the playground. Her grandmother sat nearby, smiling with a warmth that had returned after years of illness and struggle. Jamal, now a confident young man, helped organize a group of teens for a tutoring session. The apartment that had once been cramped, threadbare, and worn down was now filled with light, laughter, and hope. Alicia herself had changed in ways far beyond material comfort. Her once uncertain posture now radiated confidence. Her eyes, once filled with fear and doubt, now sparkled with determination and compassion. The woman who had once clutched a badge like a lifeline in the lobby of a towering building had grown into someone whose very presence inspired trust, courage, and hope in others. Her career had flourished after the CEO's intervention. Scholarships, mentorship, and educational opportunities allowed her to complete her degree in social work, a path she had always dreamed of but had never imagined attainable. Today, she stood not just as a survivor of public humiliation and prejudice, but as a leader, a mentor, and a beacon for others facing struggles similar to the ones she had endured. Alicia had dedicated herself to helping families like her own, those living in poverty, struggling to access basic necessities, or battling the quiet injustices of prejudice. The community center she now helped run was a safe space for children and parents alike, a place where dignity was preserved and every person was seen, respected, and supported. As she guided a group of teenagers through a life skills workshop, Alicia noticed a young girl struggling to hold back tears, clearly on the brink of despair. Her heart ached with recognition of the fear and shame she had once felt. Kneeling beside the girl, Alicia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice calm yet full of authority born from experience. "You are brave, you are capable, and you belong here exactly as you are." The girl looked up at her, wide-eyed, trembling, and then slowly a small smile began to form. Alicia's own eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of triumph. The flame of hope she had carried through the darkest moments of her life now burned brightly in her, strong enough to ignite courage in others. Later that evening, Alicia returned home to her grandmother, who was sitting comfortably in a sunlit armchair, knitting quietly. "You've done so much, my dear," her grandmother said, her voice warm and proud. "You've turned our lives around and helped so many others, too." Alicia smiled, settling beside her. I just hope I can do enough. There's still so much to fix, so many people who need help." Her grandmother reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've already done more than most people ever will. Remember, kindness and courage create ripples. You've seen how one act of justice and compassion changed your life. Now you're the one making those ripples in the lives of others." Alicia thought back to the day when a cruel guard had judged her unfairly, when a crowd had remained silent, and when she had felt utterly powerless. She thought of the CEO who had stepped in, not just to stop the humiliation, but to empower her and her family, transforming her despair into opportunity. The memory still made her chest tighten, but now it was paired with gratitude, understanding, and a commitment to give forward the grace she had received. She looked around the room, taking in the laughter of children, the chatter of parents, the warmth and energy of a space built on support and dignity. In that moment, she understood profoundly that life's true measure was not the wealth we accumulate, nor the social status we attain, but the humanity we extend to one another, the courage to intervene, the strength to uplift, and the compassion to see beyond appearances. Later, as she tucked her grandmother into bed, Alicia paused, glancing at the framed badge that had once saved her in the lobby. Its gleam had not dulled with time. Instead, it now symbolized more than survival. It symbolized the power of integrity, hope, and resilience. She whispered quietly, almost to herself, "We've come so far and we'll go even farther." The night fell gently over their home, but the warmth inside was unshakable. Alicia had not only reclaimed her dignity, but had used it to uplift others, proving that courage coupled with justice could create life-altering change. She understood that compassion is contagious, and that when wielded with conviction, it could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And so the moral of her story became clear. Humanity is measured not by what you gain, but by what you give. Kindness, courage, and compassion have the power to change lives in ways that fear and cruelty never can. Stand up for what is right, even when it feels impossible, and your actions will ripple further than you could ever imagine. Alicia's journey, from the fear and humiliation of that lobby to the empowered, thriving life she now led, served as a beacon to everyone who encountered her. She had been given a second chance, and she had taken it, not just for herself, but for her family, her community, and countless others who had yet to find their own courage. As the sun rose the next morning, casting golden light over the city, Alicia stepped outside, ready to continue the work she had begun. Every act of compassion, every intervention against injustice, every bit of hope she offered was a tribute to the day when a cruel guard underestimated her. A crowd remained silent, and yet a single act of justice changed everything. And as the audience reflects on Alicia's story, we are reminded, no act of courage is ever wasted, no act of kindness ever forgotten, and no human being should ever be judged by appearances alone. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Like, comment, and subscribe to witness more stories of courage, justice, and transformation. Together, we can honor humanity, compassion, and the power of standing up for what is right.